My family thought it would be funny to leave me stranded in another state. Let's see if he can make it back. They laughed and drove off. I never went back. 15 years later they found me. 107 missed calls. The summer I turned 22 was supposed to be like any other. Working at my dad's hardware store for miserable pay. Living at home because college wasn't an option according to the banks, my dad. And being the eternal punching bag for my brother, Alan the golden child. We weren't exactly poor, but we certainly weren't the Disney vacation type. So, when the bank announced we were taking a family road trip to my uncle's wedding in Colorado, I should have known something was up. 3 days into that nightmare trip, I already regretted not making up an excuse to stay home. My dad and Alan had been taking turns playing their favorite game, making Salvador's life hell. Mom Irene would sometimes say, "Enough," in that weak voice of hers, but we all knew it was just for show. Look, I need to explain about my family. Banks wasn't your typical jerk dad. He was the kind who woke you up at 3 a.m. to yell at you about a chore, who threw away your stuff if it was in his way, who told me I was worthless because I didn't get it the way Alan did. Alan learned quick. Be a mini Banks or be like me. Guess which road he chose. That morning we stopped at a rest area lost somewhere in Colorado. Miles of nothing. Fields, mountains in the distance, and a sad little bathroom building with vending machines. I'd been sleeping in the back of our station wagon and needed to stretch my legs, use the bathroom. Dad and Alan were laughing about something while Mom checked her makeup in the rearview mirror. I remember exactly what I was wearing. A faded Metallica t-shirt, jeans with a hole in one knee, and beat-up Vans I'd had forever. I didn't take my phone because it was charging in the car. Didn't take my wallet because why would I? We were in the middle of nowhere and I was just peeing. 10 minutes. That's how long I was in that bathroom. Maybe less. When I came out, blinking against the Colorado sun, the parking lot was empty. Our dark green Bourbon Suburban was gone. At first I thought they'd moved it, pulling some stupid prank. I walked the entire rest area. Nothing. That's the thing about betrayal from your own blood. It hits different than any other. I waited for an hour sitting on the curb telling myself they were just trying to scare me, that they'd come back. People came and went, some giving me weird looks. A trucker asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was waiting for my girlfriend, who was in the bathroom. He nodded and drove off. After 2 hours, the cold dread started in my stomach. They weren't coming back. My first instinct was to borrow someone's phone, call them, beg them to come get me. But as I was about to approach a mother with 2 kids, something stopped me. A lifetime of memories flashed through my mind. Every humiliation, every time they'd laughed at me, every joke, that was really just thinly veiled cruelty with a punchline. I could almost hear them. Alan's voice. Dude, I bet he's crying right now. My dad's, he'll figure it out. If he's not as dumb as he looks. My mom's weak protest, changing nothing. So I made a decision. I walked up to that mom and asked to use her phone. Said my mom was in the bathroom. I used her phone, but I didn't call my family. I called information and got the number of the nearest shelter, in Grand Junction about 40 miles away. Then I asked her for a ride into town. Said my family had an emergency and had to leave, but they'd send someone for me later. She hesitated for a moment, but I must have looked harmless enough because she agreed. That first night at the shelter was a dose of reality. I had nothing but the clothes on my back. No ID. No money. No contacts. The guy at the shelter, Dave, let me use his computer to look up my uncle's address on the wedding invitation I'd seen. I thought maybe I could go to the wedding, find my family there. But then I stared at the screen and thought, what's the point? What's the point of chasing after people who literally abandoned me on the side of the road for fun? Instead, I created a new email account. I looked up resources for people who needed emergency ID replacements. I Googled jobs that paid cash. I made a plan. 2 days later, I was washing dishes at a greasy spoon diner called Sonny's. The owner, Geraldine, was a woman in her 60s with purple-streaked gray hair, and more tattoos than you'd expect. I walked in, didn't care about the grease, asked if they needed help, told her my wallet had been stolen but I needed to work. She sized me up and said, "The dishwasher quit yesterday. You steal, you're dead. Start now." That's the thing about hitting rock bottom. From there it can only get better. For a week I worked double shifts, slept at the shelter, wore donated clothes. Dave helped me start the process of getting a replacement ID. By contacting the Vital Records office in my state. I set up a cheap burner phone at Walmart with the first money I earned. 7 days after they left me, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered. It was my mom's shaky voice. Where are you? Are you okay? We've been looking all over for you. Lie. It was just supposed to be a joke. Double lie. They waited 20 minutes down the road. They came back and you weren't there. Bullshit. I listened to her panic, her fake concern. In the background, I could hear my dad telling her to stop the drama and just go to Uncle Rick's. I could hear Alan laughing. Salvador? Are you there? Say something. We've been so worried. The cold dread in my stomach was gone. Now there was only clarity. You wanted to see if I could make it on my own, I said, my voice firmer than it had ever been when speaking to them. So watch. I hung up and blocked the number. Then I blocked every number I could remember from my family just in case. I went to the Verizon store the next day and changed my number completely. 27 missed calls before I changed it. Figured they'd be pissed to realize their punching bag wasn't coming back to get pummeled. A month later, I had my own studio apartment above a laundromat. It was tiny and smelled like fabric softener all the time, but it was mine. I'd worked my way up to prep cook at Sonny's, and Geraldine was teaching me how to properly dice vegetables without losing a finger. Sometimes I'd check my old email, the one my family knew. Mom's messages piled up. Please come home. We're sorry. Dad's. This childish nonsense has to stop now. Alan's. Hey, it was just a joke. Stop being such a pussy. I didn't reply to a single one. That's the thing about freedom. Once you've tasted it, there's no going back. Look, I'm not going to pretend it was easy. Some nights I'd scroll through Instagram, see pictures of people with normal families who actually loved each other, and feel an ache no amount of cheap whiskey could numb. I had nights where the loneliness felt like it would swallow me whole. Holidays were the worst. But every morning, I woke up in my little fabric softener scented apartment, went to my dishwashing job where no one called me worthless, and built my life brick by brick. 3 months after they left me at that rest stop, I checked my old email one last time. There was a new message from my mom. Your grandmother's asking for you. Please just let us know you're alive. I closed the email, deleted the account, and tossed my old SIM card into the dumpster behind Sonny's. That night Geraldine taught me how to make her famous apple pie, and said I had a real knack for baking. It was the first genuine compliment I remember getting in years. I never looked back. Update 1. 5 years after they abandoned me at that Colorado rest stop, I found myself staring at a familiar face on my Facebook wall. Not because I was like lurking on my family's profiles. Okay, maybe a little. But whatever. Alan had just been featured in a local news story back in my hometown. DUI. Crashed his car into a telephone pole. Nobody hurt but the pole. The paper had used his high school football picture. He looked so young, so smug. Nothing like the bloated mugshot below it. That's the thing about karma. It moves at its own pace, but it never forgets an address. By then, I'd built something resembling a life in Colorado. My dilapidated studio above the laundromat had been traded for a one-bedroom with actual windows. I'd moved up from dishwasher to line cook, then to assistant manager at Sonny's. Geraldine was still running the place with an iron fist and a flour-dusted glove, but she'd started treating me less like a charity case and more like, I don't know, a weird nephew or something. My first big purchase when I actually had real savings was a decent laptop. Nothing fancy, just enough to take online classes at the community college. Business administration, basic accounting, all the stuff banks always said was, for people who can't do real work. I'd spend mornings at Sonny's, afternoons studying, then back to work for the evening rush. And hey, I'm not going to pretend I wasn't messed up from what happened. Trust issues, more like trust subscriptions I could cancel the second someone got too close. I had made exactly 2 friends in 5 years. My neighbor Dee, who played bass in a terrible grunge band and sometimes brought me homebrew that tasted like dishwater with hops, and Geraldine, if that counted as a friend and not a boss. That changed when Kendra started coming into Sonny's every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. Same order every time. Denver omelet, no tomatoes, extra coffee. Always sat at the counter with her med school textbook. She had this way of completely tuning out while studying. For minutes straight, I timed her once. Record was 7 minutes 23 seconds before she realized she had cold eggs in her hand. For months of refilling her coffee before she looked up and saw me. Really saw me. Her eyes went a little wide and she said, "My name tag is spelled wrong." It wasn't, but it became our weird joke. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I'd use a different wrong name. Kendra, Kendra, Kindle. She caught on. I play surprised. Dumbest flirtation in history, but it worked. Our first date wasn't even supposed to be a date. Her study group bailed last minute. She had a reservation at this impossible to get into pizza place and was just clearing off the counter when she got the cancellation text. Suddenly, I was sitting across from her at Antonio's, both of us realizing with a certain awkwardness that this felt like a date. 6 months later, she moved into my apartment. A year after that, we bought a slightly bigger house. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms with a bathroom where the toilet didn't run constantly and neighbors who didn't practice bass solos at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on my family via fake accounts. Not proud of it, but there it is. Dad's hardware store started struggling after a Home Depot opened up on the edge of town. I saw him ranting about it on community Facebook pages, his posts getting increasingly desperate and bitter. Mom's social media became a weird family shrine. Constant old photos of everyone smiling, posts about missing her kids plural, which was rich. She'd tag Alan but never mention me like I'd been erased. Alan bounced from job to job. Lots of vague posting about haters and new opportunities. The classic social media smokescreen of someone whose life is going down the drain. 3 years in, Geraldine pulled me aside during inventory and said she was thinking of opening a second Sonny's across town. Asked if I'd be interested in managing it. Not owning, managing. Important distinction. I didn't sleep that night. Kept thinking it was some kind of test or a joke. People like me didn't get opportunities like that. Banks had made sure I understood that. That's the thing about toxic beliefs. They stay in your system long after you've escaped the snake. But I said yes because Kendra, half asleep next to me, mumbled that I'd be stupid not to. Because Dee, through a cloud of weed smoke, said, "Dude, you practically run the original place already." Because Geraldine wasn't Banks. Wasn't the Banks. Wasn't my family. And she'd never made me feel worthless. Sonny's East opened 6 months later. Smaller than the original, different menu, my menu. I worked 90-hour weeks that first year. Lost 10 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. Fought with Kendra because I was never home. Came home to passive-aggressive sticky notes on the fridge more than once. But it worked. People came. People came back. The food was good. The vibe was good. We weren't getting rich, but we were making it. 4 years after they abandoned me, I made enough to help Kendra with her med school loans. Not all of them, those things are monstrous, but enough to make a dent. She cried when I showed her the payment confirmation. Not movie cry, perfect mascara tear cry. Real cry. Snot. Red-faced, hiccuping cry. I'd never felt as real as I did in that moment. Then my grandmother died. I found out through Facebook. Mom posted this long, dramatic tribute with a million heart emojis. Grandma Rose had been the only one in the family who stood up to Banks. The only one who seemed to see me. She used to slip me $20 bills when no one was looking. Told me to save it for your escape. I think she meant college. Turned out it was more literal. I thought about going to the funeral. Even looked up flights. Kendra said she'd come with me. Took my hand during that whole awful reunion with Dee. Offered her beat-up hatchback if I wanted to drive. Geraldine shrugged and said, "The dead don't know if you're there or not, so do what gives you peace." I didn't go. Instead, I sent flowers. A generic sympathy arrangement. I signed the card. Salvador. No return address. No note. Just my name. The social media explosion was immediate. Mom posting about signs and help from beyond. Alan making cryptic comments about prodigal sons. Banks didn't say anything publicly, but I could picture the closed-door storm. A week later, I got a friend request from a profile I didn't recognize. Generic name. No posts. No friends. Almost deleted it until I saw the message. "Sal, it's Uncle Rick. Your mom gave me your old email, but it bounced back. Are you okay? We've been worried. Your dad's been asking about you." I blocked the account. That night, I had my first panic attack in 2 years. Sitting on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., trying not to wake Kendra. Felt like my lungs were collapsing. I saw Banks chasing me, showing up at Sunny's, destroying everything I'd built. Kendra found me there an hour later. Didn't ask questions. Just sat with me, her shoulder against mine, until I could finally breathe again. She said something very simple. They can't take anything from you that you don't give them. The next morning I called a lawyer. Got advice about restraining orders just in case. Tighter privacy settings on everything. Asked Geraldine to alert the staff not to share any information about me. Practical measures. Control what you can control. Update 2: 5 years after being abandoned, I married Kendra. Small ceremony at a state park. Dee was my best man. Geraldine made the cake and cried the entire time. Mascara running down her wrinkled cheeks. Kendra's big, loud family adopted me instantly. Her dad told dad jokes that for some reason didn't make me cringe. Her mom hugged me without it setting off alarm bells. That's the thing about found families. Sometimes they find you when you stop looking. A week after the wedding, scrolling through my dummy account late at night, I saw it. A post from Banks on a community page. Seeking information about my son Salvador. Last known location Grand Junction, Colorado. Family emergency. There was no emergency. I knew that. What I didn't know was why, after 5 years of nothing, they were suddenly looking for me. So I dug deeper. Created another fake account. Joined my hometown groups. Pieced it together bit by bit. The hardware store had closed. Their house was in foreclosure. Mom had some medical issues they were vague about. Alan was back home after his 3rd DUI arrest. They weren't looking for me because they missed me. They were looking for me because they needed something. And you know what? For the first time in 5 years, I smiled thinking about them. Not because I enjoyed their misfortune, but because I realized something important. I didn't care anymore. I closed the laptop, crawled into bed next to my sleeping wife, and made a decision. I'd keep watching from a distance. Not out of hate. Not out of love. But because sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do, it's what you build while they're busy destroying themselves. Update 3: Final. It started with a LinkedIn notification. 15 years after being abandoned at that Colorado rest stop, my carefully constructed life had a glitch. Someone had viewed my profile 27 times in one day. Normal enough on LinkedIn. Recruiters do weird stuff like that all the time. What wasn't normal was the name. Alan Matthew Banks. My brother. That's the thing about the past. It's patient. It'll wait in the tall grass for years before striking. By then, my life looked nothing like that first year in Grand Junction. Kendra had finished med school, done her residency, and now worked at a local clinic 3 days a week so she could be home more with our kids. We had two, L7 and Marcus 4. The apartment above the laundromat had given way to a modest 4-bedroom on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but with a yard where the kids could play and I could grow tomatoes that never quite ripened. Sunny's had expanded to 3 locations. Still not a huge franchise or anything, but enough that I didn't have to work the line anymore, except when someone called out sick. Geraldine had semi-retired 2 years prior, though she still showed up sometimes. I'd made peace with my past, or so I thought. I still kept tabs on the family from a distance, but the constant checking in had tapered off to maybe once every few months. Last I knew, Banks and Irene had downsized after losing the house. Alan had gotten married, divorced, and remarried. Everyone seemed to have moved on with their lives just like I had with mine. The LinkedIn thing threw me. 15 years of silence and now this. I mentioned it to Kendra while we were doing our usual Sunday night thing. Folding laundry while half watching whatever Netflix series we were behind on. She paused, a mismatched sock in each hand, and asked if I was okay. I nodded because what else could I say? That suddenly I was 22 again, stranded at a rest stop, feeling Banks' voice in my head telling me I was worthless. 3 days later, I was at Sunny's East, the original second location, helping with inventory because our supplier had sent the wrong coffee filters again when Maya at the front called back, saying I had some family asking for me. My first thought was Kendra's parents, who sometimes surprised us by dropping by. I walked out already thinking about how to convince them to stay for dinner. It wasn't Kendra's family. It was Banks. He looked older, grayer, his once imposing frame shrunk somehow. Irene's face had that drawn look that comes with years of worry. Her hair dyed an unnatural shade of brown. And Alan looked like Banks at 40. Same posture, same way of taking up space. There was a woman with them I didn't recognize. Young, maybe early 20s, hanging back like she wasn't sure she belonged. For a long moment no one spoke. The lunchtime noise seemed to fade until I could only hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Banks broke first, saying my name like a question. I nodded because apparently my voice had gone on vacation. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 different ways over 15 years. In some versions I delivered a spectacular, "I told you so." In others I remained cold and aloof, uncaring about their existence. In some particularly embarrassing late-night scenarios, we even had a tearful reconciliation. Reality is always messier than imagination. I gestured to an empty table in the corner, told Maya to bring water. I sat across from my once family and waited. They'd found me because of the article in Rocky Mountain Rising. 10 local success stories. It wasn't even a feature article, just a sidebar with a picture of me in front of the original Sunnies. But apparently, a friend of my mom's from high school had moved to Colorado, seen it, and sent it to her with a message along the lines of, "Isn't this your son?" 127 missed calls. That's how many they'd made to my old number over the years before I disconnected it. Mom kept track. She mentioned it like it meant something. They all talked at once. Mom about how worried they'd been. Banks about how I'd misinterpreted what happened that day. Alan, awkwardly trying to pretend we were old buddies catching up. The young woman Poppy, Alan's second wife, as it turned out, watched me with a curious expression. I let them talk. Watched their version of reality, the one where they weren't the villains. Watched Banks constantly scan the restaurant, mentally calculating how much it might be worth. Saw Mom's hand tremble slightly as she picked up her water. Saw Alan's practice charm slip every time he thought I wasn't looking directly at him. Finally, when they'd run out of steam, I asked the only question that mattered. Why now? That's when the Rael story came out, in bits and pieces, between uncomfortable silences. Banks had medical bills, troubles with the insurance. The second house was in foreclosure too. Alan's business, something vague involving cryptocurrency, had imploded spectacularly. Poppy's mother needed knee surgery they couldn't afford. They weren't there for reconciliation. They were there for money. I should have been angry. I should have thrown them out. Instead I felt something unexpected, pity. They looked so small, so desperate. These giants who once controlled my entire world were just flawed, broken people. I invited them to dinner at my house that night. Said I needed to talk to Kendra. They agreed eagerly. Banks was already about to call it a done deal. That evening was surreal. I picked Elle up from dance class, helped Marcus with his pre-K show and tell prep, all while texting Kendra updates about who was coming to dinner. She offered to take the kids to her sister's. I told her no. I didn't want them to not be there. I wanted my family to meet my family. Dinner was chicken enchiladas, my specialty, which wasn't really special, just a recipe off the back of an old pastebox that I'd tweaked over the years. Elle set the table without being asked, carefully placing the forks on the wrong side until Kendra discreetly corrected her. Marcus insisted on wearing his Spider-Man costume because it was Tuesday, and apparently Tuesday was now Spider-Man Day. When the doorbell rang, I almost dropped the dish I was carrying to the table. Kendra squeezed my arm as she passed, whispering that she had my back, no matter what. The kids looked up, curious, sensing something important was happening. That's the thing about the moments you dread. When they finally arrive, they're both worse and better than you imagined. Introductions were awkward. Banks kept calling Kendra Karen despite corrections. Irene kept tearing up every time she looked at the kids, which freaked Marcus out. Alan and Poppy were the least awful, actually trying to make normal conversation, though Alan kept making pointed remarks about how family helps family. After dinner, Kendra took the kids upstairs for baths and bedtime, giving me a look that clearly said, "Text me if you need extraction." Then it was just us, them and me, in a living room that suddenly felt too small. Banks started in on the whole family sticks together spiel. How he always knew I'd make something of myself lie. How they just needed a little help to get back on their feet. Only alone. Just this once. Sure. I let him finish. Then I asked if he remembered what he'd said to me on my 18th birthday. He blanked. I reminded him, "At least you can't disappoint me anymore. Once you're legally not my problem." I asked Mom if she remembered what she did when Banks threw away my community college acceptance letter. Nothing. She'd done nothing. I asked Alan if he remembered telling my first girlfriend I was probably gay when she came over to my house looking for me. He squirmed, getting that dangerous edge to his voice that used to make me shrink. But here's the thing. I didn't shrink anymore. I was 15 years and 1,000 miles away from that person. I went to my office, came back with an envelope and handed it to Banks. Inside was a check for $73.50. Banks stared at it, confused. Asked what the hell this was supposed to be. I told him that, in 2010, that was exactly how much a bus ticket from Grand Junction to our hometown would have cost. The exact amount it would have cost me to get back from where they abandoned me. The silence was absolute. Then Banks started yelling. Called me ungrateful, selfish. Said I'd always been a disappointment. The greatest hits album of my childhood, playing one last time. I didn't argue. I didn't yell back. I just stood up and told them it was time to go. Mom tried a different tack. Tears, guilt. How could I do this to my family? Alan just went cold. His friendly brother act completely gone. Poppy looked embarrassed for all of them. When they finally left, Banks crumpled the check and threw it on the walkway. I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs suddenly shaky. Kendra came downstairs and asked if I was okay. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We cleaned up the dinner dishes in silence, checked on the sleeping kids, and got ready for bed like any other night. While setting the security system, I pulled up the front door camera on my phone. They were still arguing on the walkway. Banks gesturing wildly, Mom crying. Alan staring at our house with an expression I recognized all too well. Envy mixed with resentment. Finally, they got in their rental car and drove away. I've never seen or heard from them again. Don't expect a comeback. This chapter's closed. That's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't something you do, it's something you live. Every happy moment with my kids, every inside joke with Kendra, every quiet Sunday morning with nothing to fear, every normal day of a life built on my own terms. I never went back home. I did something better. I built one.